The rifle
Target in
bucked
sight. Range
against
clear.
Bryn Calloway's
Copy. Eyes
shoulder.
on.
Wind
Through
adjusted
the
main.
scope,
Hold
she
your breath.
watched a man
On your mark.
fall at 620 yards, the eighth kill of the night. Or was it the ninth? She'd lost
Target
count
acquired.
somewhere between the
Fire when
moment the
ready.
helicopter
Firing.
crashed and the
Target
moment
hit.
she
Just
grabbed a
2 rounds
weapon
left.
that wasn't hers. 72 hours ago, her biggest concern had been a discrepancy in the ammunition inventory logs. Now she was the only thing standing between 14 Navy SEALs and a violent death in the darkness. But let's go back. Let's go back to before the fire and the blood and the moment that changed everything. Back to when Bryn Calloway was just a supply clerk who counted bullets instead of firing them. The morning sun hammered down on the base like a physical weight. 115 degrees by noon. The air tasted like dust in diesel fuel and the particular brand of misery that only a combat zone could produce. Bryn sat in the dim coolness of the supply depot, her eyes scanning spreadsheets on a laptop that took 30 seconds to load each page. 7,200 rounds of 5.56 millimeter NATO ammunition, cataloged, verified, ready for distribution. The M240 Bravo machine gun belts were organized by lot number. The 50 caliber BMG rounds sat in their specialized containers, each one accounted for, down to the last cartridge. Everything in its place, everything documented with obsessive precision. This was what Bryn understood: order, systems, predictability. She was 24 years old, originally from Butte, Montana, where her father had worked in the copper mines until a cave-in crushed 3 vertebrae in his lower back. Her mother taught elementary school and stretched every dollar until it screamed. When Bryn graduated high school, college wasn't even discussed. The family needed money, not more debt. The Army recruited heavily in towns like Butte. Good pay, benefits, job training, a chance to see something beyond the same gray mountains she'd stared at her entire life. Bryn signed the papers 2 weeks after her 18th birthday. Basic training nearly broke her. The drill sergeant screamed until veins bulged in his neck. She ran until her legs felt like rubber bands. She crawled through mud under barbed wire while instructors fired blank rounds over her head. 3 recruits in her platoon quit in the first week. Bryn wanted to quit every single day, but quitting meant going home with nothing. Quitting meant her father had sacrificed his back for nothing. Quitting meant she was exactly as small as that gray Montana town had always made her feel. So she didn't quit. She pushed through every obstacle with stubborn, grinding determination. Not because she was brave, because the alternative was unacceptable. After basic training, she specialized in logistics and supply chain management. It wasn't glamorous. Nobody would write stories about the person who counted bullets and verified serial numbers on equipment. But it suited her methodical mind. She was good with numbers, good with details. She never forgot an order or miscounted inventory. Her superiors noticed her reliability quickly. Eventually, they assigned her here. Forward Operating Base Griffin, middle of nowhere, Afghanistan, where insurgents controlled the surrounding territory and every supply convoy was a potential ambush. Bryn closed the laptop and wiped sweat from her forehead. Even in the shade, the heat was oppressive. She checked her watch, 1100 hours. Lunch in the mess hall meant sitting with the same 3 people she ate with every day. Briggs, the mechanic from Texas, who could rebuild a Humvee engine blindfolded. Keller, the communications specialist who handled encrypted radio systems. And Tobias Merrick, the combat medic who had saved more lives than he could count and never talked about any of them. They were good people, as close to friends as you could have in a place like this. The mess hall smelled like industrial cleaner and overcooked meat. Bryn grabbed a tray of something that might have been chicken and scanned the room. Tobias sat alone in the corner, looking exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. She made her way over and sat down without asking. That's how it worked here. You didn't wait for invitations. Before Tobias could speak, a loud voice cut through the general noise of the mess hall. Y'all hear Calloway's volunteering for gun quals? Staff Sergeant Hewitt Devereaux. Everyone called him Bulldog. 35 years old, infantry lifer, built like a linebacker with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite with a dull chisel. He sat 3 tables over with a cluster of other infantry guys, all of them grinning at some private joke. "What's she gonna do?" Hewitt continued, his Louisiana drawl dripping with amusement. "Throw spreadsheets at the enemy? File a damage report in triplicate?" The infantry table erupted in laughter. Bryn kept her eyes on her tray. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Just cut into her rubber chicken with mechanical precision. "Leave it alone, Hewitt." Tobias's voice was quiet but carried an edge. "Show some respect. Calloway's got more discipline than half your squad." Hewitt turned in his seat, grinning. "Discipline don't stop bullets, Doc. When shit hits the fan out there, all your pretty discipline gets you is a body bag." He raised his voice slightly. "No offense, Calloway. I'm sure you're real good at counting things. Just stay in your lane, is all I'm saying." Bryn finally looked up, met his eyes across 3 tables. "I count the bullets you waste, Devereaux. Every single one." The mess hall went quiet for about 3 seconds. Then Hewitt threw his head back and laughed. "Damn, girl's got some fire. All right, respect." But his tone said he didn't respect anything at all. Bryn returned to her meal. Tobias shook his head. "Guy's an asshole." "Guys like that always are," Bryn said quietly. But inside something burned. Not anger exactly, something colder, more calculating. The same feeling she got when a supply count didn't match and she had to track down the error. A problem that needed solving. From the corner of the mess hall, someone else had been watching the exchange. An older man, sitting alone near the exit. Weathered face covered in lines that looked like they'd been carved by wind and sun and decades of hard living. Scars ran down both his forearms. He walked with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. But his eyes were sharp, alert, the eyes of someone who missed nothing. Master Sergeant Silas Lancaster. Everyone called him Sid. He'd been watching Bryn Calloway for weeks now, watching the way she moved through the base with quiet efficiency, watching the way she kept her head down and did her job without complaint, watching the way other soldiers overlooked her, dismissed her, treated her like furniture. And he'd been thinking about his daughter. That evening, Bryn walked back to her quarters as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The heat was finally breaking. Still over 100 degrees, but the worst of it had passed. "Calloway," she turned. Sid stood about 10 feet away, hands in his pockets. He must have been waiting for her. "Master Sergeant," she straightened slightly, not quite coming to attention, but showing respect. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. Bryn fell into step beside him as he headed toward the edge of the base, where the blast barrier separated them from the endless desert beyond. They walked in silence for a minute. Sid seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "Devereaux's an asshole," he finally said. "Yes, Master Sergeant. But he's got one thing right. You need to know more than spreadsheet skills out here." Bryn glanced at him. His profile was all hard angles in the fading light. "I went through basic combat training. I know how to shoot." "When was the last time you actually fired a weapon?" "Basic training, 18 months ago." Sid nodded like this confirmed something he'd already suspected. "That's what I thought." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I run an optional program, Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Show up if you want to be more than just a name on a casualty list." Bryn studied him. "Why do you care, Master Sergeant?" For just a moment, something flickered across Sid's face. Pain, maybe, or regret. "Because everyone should know how to hold the line when the moment demands it." He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to her. 1900 hours, range 4, your choice." He walked away before she could respond. Bryn looked at the paper. Crude handwriting listed times and a location on the far side of the base. At the bottom, a single sentence in capital letters. Every soldier holds the line when the moment demands it. She folded the paper and put it in her pocket. She probably wouldn't go. She had inventory to manage, reports to file. Her job was important enough without adding extra complications. But that evening, after finishing her logistics duties, she found herself walking toward the coordinates Sid had written down. The shooting range sat at the edge of the base, surrounded by blast barriers and overlooked by a guard tower. At 1900 hours, the temperature had dropped to a merely oppressive 105 degrees. Bryn approached a small group of soldiers standing near a weapons rack. Most were younger than her, support personnel by the look of them. People who worked in communications or vehicle maintenance or administrative roles. People like her. Sid stood facing them. When he looked at Bryn, she felt evaluated and measured in about 3 seconds. "You're new," he said. His voice was gravelly, like he'd spent decades shouting over gunfire. "Bryn Calloway, logistics specialist. Name? Calloway, Master Sergeant. You know how to shoot? I qualified in basic training." Sid walked to the weapons rack and pulled out an M4 carbine. "That means nothing." He handed her the rifle. "This is an M4, 5.56 millimeter, effective range 300 meters. You'll start here." The rifle felt heavier than she remembered. The metal was hot from sitting in the sun. Sid spent the next 20 minutes going over fundamentals. How to load the magazine, how to achieve a proper sight picture, how to breathe before pulling the trigger. His teaching style was direct and efficient. No wasted words, no encouragement or criticism, just information delivered with the expectation that she would absorb it. Finally, he pointed downrange at paper targets set at 100 yards. "Show me what basic training taught you." Bryn positioned herself at the firing line. Her hands were sweating inside her gloves. She pressed the rifle stock against her shoulder, found the front sight post, and tried to remember everything from 18 months ago. Breathe slowly. Squeeze, don't pull. Follow through. She fired 5 rounds in careful succession. The rifle kicked against her shoulder with each shot. The smell of gunpowder filled her nostrils. When she lowered the weapon, Sid walked downrange without comment. He examined her target, then turned back toward her. His expression was unreadable. He returned and took the rifle from her hands. "Look at your grouping." Bryn squinted at the target. Her 5 shots had punched through the paper in a cluster about the size of her fist, all of them within a few inches of the center. "Most beginners scatter rounds everywhere," Sid said quietly. "Their hands shake. They flinch. They pull the trigger instead of squeezing it." He looked at her with those sharp eyes. "You did none of those things. Your grouping is tight. Your shots are controlled." He paused. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite approval, but recognition. "You have natural talent. Most people don't." Another pause. "That means you should develop it." Bryn didn't know what to say. Natural talent? She was a supply clerk. She counted things. "I just followed the fundamentals, Master Sergeant." "No," Sid's voice was firm. "Lots of people follow fundamentals. Very few shoot like this their first time back in 18 months. He studied her face. "You don't count. You calculate. There's a difference. Big one." That night, lying in her bunk, Bryn replayed those words. Natural talent. In the top 5%. You calculate. Nobody had ever told her she had talent at anything except keeping spreadsheets accurate. She thought about Hewitt's mocking voice in the mess hall. Thought about spending the rest of her deployment counting bullets in a climate-controlled warehouse while other soldiers put their lives on the line. Maybe, just maybe, she could be more than that. Over the following weeks, Bryn showed up every Tuesday and Thursday evening. The training became a rhythm she looked forward to. Her logistics work was important, but it was also monotonous. The same spreadsheets, the same inventory counts, the same reports filed in the same format. The shooting range was different. There was immediate feedback. Either the bullet went where she intended, or it didn't. No ambiguity, no paperwork, just physics and skill and concentration. Sid taught with quiet intensity. He explained the science behind marksmanship, how wind affected bullet trajectory, how temperature changed powder burn rates, how breathing at the wrong moment could shift point of impact by several inches. By the third week, he introduced her to different weapon systems. The M240 Bravo machine gun, the M249 Squad automatic weapon. Each one had different characteristics, different recoil patterns, different effective ranges. Bryn absorbed everything like a sponge. At night, she'd review Sid's lessons in her head, calculate wind drift formulas, memorize the ballistic coefficients of different ammunition types. It gave her something to think about besides the endless monotony of supply management. Then, in the sixth week, Sid brought out something different. The M110 semi-automatic sniper system sat on the bench like a piece of precision machinery, which is exactly what it was. Longer than the M4, heavier, a powerful scope mounted on top. This wasn't a rifle for spraying bullets at close targets. This was for surgical precision at extreme distances. Sid handled it with reverence. 7.62 millimeter NATO, effective range 800 meters, semi-automatic, so you can put rounds downrange faster than bolt-action systems. He looked at her. But it requires perfect trigger discipline. Any flinch gets magnified through the scope. He set up targets at 300 yards, tiny dots in the distance. Bryn settled behind the rifle. The scope brought the world into sharp focus. She could see individual staple holes in the paper target. Through the magnified view, 300 yards felt like 50. Sid's voice was calm beside her. Breathe slowly, let half the breath out. Hold, squeeze. The rifle bucked harder than the M4. The boom was louder, deeper. Through the scope, Bryn watched the bullet punch through the paper just left of center. Wind, Sid said. You didn't account for the crosswind. Try again. She made the adjustment. The second shot hit dead center. By the end of the session, she'd put 9 out of 10 rounds within a 6-inch circle at 300 yards. Her shoulder ached from the recoil. Her eyes were tired from staring through the scope. But something inside her felt settled and calm in a way it rarely did. Sid was quiet as they cleaned the weapons. Finally, he spoke without looking at her. You could do this professionally. Sniper school, precision marksman courses. He paused. You have the temperament for it. Patience, no ego, ability to stay still and wait. Bryn laughed, uncomfortable with the suggestion. I'm happy with logistics. I don't need to be a hero. It's not about being a hero. Sid's voice was sharp now. It's about using the abilities you have. Not everyone can do what you're doing right now. Most people can't. He turned to look at her directly. I've been teaching marksmanship for 25 years, trained hundreds of soldiers. You're in the top 5% of natural shooters I've ever seen. Bryn didn't know how to respond to that. She mumbled something about just being lucky and helped finish cleaning the weapons in silence. But Sid's words stayed with her. She thought about them during her inventory duties. She thought about them lying in her bunk at night, listening to the desert wind howl outside. Could she really do more than count bullets? The question felt dangerous, like opening a door she might not be able to close. Week 3 of training. Late evening, after a particularly good session, Sid invited Bryn to sit on the tailgate of his truck. He produced 2 bottles of water from a cooler and handed her one. They sat in silence, watching the sun set over the desert. The sky turned orange and purple. In this light, you could almost forget the war happening just beyond the blast barriers. I had a daughter, Sid said suddenly. Bryn turned to look at him, surprised. He never talked about personal matters. She'd be about your age now, 24, 25. His voice was flat, but pain edged every word. Haven't spoken to her in 6 years. She said I chose the army over family, said I was never there when it mattered. He took a long drink of water. She's probably right. Bryn didn't know what to say. The silence stretched between them. My wife died of cancer in 2008, Sid continued. My daughter didn't even call to tell me until 3 days after the funeral. That's when I knew I'd failed at the things that were supposed to matter most. He turned to look at Bryn. His eyes were wet. You remind me of her. That same determination, that same quiet strength. He looked away, back at the sunset. Teaching you feels like a second chance. Like maybe I can do right by someone, even if I failed with her. The weight of that confession settled between them. Bryn understood suddenly why Sid invested so much time in these training sessions. Why he showed up every week, even though he was close to retirement and had no official obligation. Why he cared so much whether she developed her abilities. She wasn't just a student. She was a proxy for the daughter he'd lost. I'm sorry, Bryn said, because nothing else seemed adequate. Don't be sorry. Just don't waste what you have. Sid stood up stiffly, his bad leg making him wince. Talent is rare. Purpose is rarer. If you ever find both together, you hold on to them. That night, Bryn couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Sid's daughter, about the pain in his eyes when he talked about her, about the idea that she could somehow be a second chance for him. It made the training feel heavier, more meaningful, not just about learning to shoot, about redemption, about connection, about two people finding something they needed in each other. Mid-October, the briefing. The room was secured, maps covering every wall. Bryn sat in the back with other support personnel, trying to make sense of the tactical overlays and grid coordinates. Lieutenant Jackson Bishop stood at the front of the room, mid-30s, compact and muscular, with a kind of quiet confidence that came from leading men in combat for over a decade. SEAL team operator, the kind of soldier who made difficult look effortless. Operation Valkyrie, he began, his Texas drawl softening the hard consonants. Intelligence indicates a Taliban weapons cache 18 miles north of the base. High-value target confirmed on site. He clicked through several satellite images. 14-man SEAL team will insert by helicopter under cover of darkness. Will approach the compound on foot, neutralize enemy fighters, and extract before dawn. He paused, letting that sink in. The mission requires support personnel, someone to manage ammunition resupply, someone to carry extra medical equipment, someone who can stay close to the action but won't panic under pressure. His eyes scanned the room. I need a volunteer from logistics, someone reliable who won't freeze up if things get complicated. Bryn's hand went up before she consciously decided to raise it. The room went quiet. Every head turned to look at her. In the back row, supply clerk, the girl Hewitt had mocked in the mess hall 3 weeks ago. Bishop nodded. Calloway, you're on the manifest. Report to the armory at 2200 hours tomorrow for gear issue. That was it. No discussion, no second guessing. She'd volunteered and now she was committed. After the briefing, soldiers filed out in small groups. Bryn stood alone in the hallway, her heart hammering against her ribs. What had she just done? Calloway, she turned. Hewitt stood 10 feet away. For once, he wasn't grinning. His expression was serious, almost concerned. You sure about this? He asked. No shame in letting someone else go. This ain't counting bullets in a warehouse. Bryn met his eyes. They need someone reliable. I'm reliable. Hewitt studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right then. Don't get yourself killed out there. He paused. Seriously, don't. It was the first time he'd spoken to her without mockery. The first hint of actual respect. Bryn found Sid outside the building. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You don't have to do this, he finally said. Logistics specialists aren't required to go outside the wire. I know, Bryn said. She felt strangely calm about the whole thing. But they need someone reliable. And you've been telling me for weeks that I'm capable of more than I think. Maybe it's time to prove it. Sid studied her face. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather notebook. The cover was worn smooth from years of handling. He pressed it into her hands. Started writing this in 1983. Grenada. Every lesson I learned the hard way. Every mistake that almost got me killed. Every piece of wisdom worth passing on. Bryn opened it carefully. Pages filled with sketches, calculations, handwritten observations, wind drift tables, range estimation techniques, notes on breath control and trigger discipline. "I can't take this," she protested. "This is yours." "It's yours now." Sid's voice was firm. "Trust what I taught you. You're ready for more than carrying boxes. You've always been ready. You just needed the right circumstances to see it." He gripped her shoulder once, hard, then walked away without looking back. That night, Bryn lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. The fans spun slowly overhead, moving hot air in lazy circles. She could hear other soldiers in nearby bunks breathing, shifting, one person talking quietly in their sleep. She thought about her parents back in Montana, her father with his ruined back, sitting in the living room watching television because standing hurt too much. Her mother grading papers at the kitchen table, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. Her younger brother starting community college and working 2 jobs to pay for it. They had no idea what she was about to do. They thought she counted supplies in a secure warehouse. They thought she was safe. Maybe she would be safe. The briefing made it sound straightforward. Stay 50 yards back from the action. Distribute ammunition as needed. The SEALs would handle the dangerous work. But something in Sid's eyes when he gave her that notebook suggested he knew better. Suggested that plans rarely survive contact with reality. Bryn pulled the notebook from under her pillow and flipped through it by the dim light of a battery-powered lantern. Page after page of hard-won knowledge. On the inside back cover, she found an inscription she hadn't noticed before. Written in Sid's careful handwriting, "Bryn, you'll hit a wall. Everyone does. When you want to quit, remember, the only failure is stopping before you're finished. Everything else is just a temporary setback. You've got this. You've always had this." Silas Lancaster. Dated September 14th, the day before she'd raised her hand to volunteer for this mission. He'd known. Somehow he'd known she would end up here. September 11th, 2100 hours, the night before the mission. Bryn sat on her bunk, cleaning her M4 carbine for the 3rd time. The weapon was already spotless, but the repetitive motion helped calm her mind. Strip the bolt carrier group. Wipe down the firing pin. Check the extractor spring. Reassemble. Function check. Her gear was laid out on the footlocker beside her bunk. 16 magazines of 5.56 millimeter for her M4. Additional belts for the machine guns. Extra medical supplies, and tucked in the side pouch, 4 magazines of 7.62 millimeter that Finnegan had asked her to carry as backup for his M110. 6 liters of water, night vision mount, gloves, knee pads, everything she might need. Everything except courage. A knock on the doorframe. Tobias Merrick stood in the entrance, medical kit slung over one shoulder. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Something like that." He came in and sat on the footlocker, picked up one of her magazines, examined it, set it back down precisely where it had been. First time outside the wire is always the worst. The fear, not knowing what to expect. "How many times have you been out?" "Lost count after 50. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Gets easier, sort of. You learn to put the fear in a box and deal with it later." "What if I freeze up out there? What if I'm not ready?" Tobias looked at her directly. "Sid doesn't train people who aren't ready. If he gave you that notebook, it means he trusts you with his legacy. That's not something he'd do lightly." They sat in silence for a moment. "Besides," Tobias continued, "you've already proven you can handle pressure. You keep this entire FOB supplied with everything they need. You've never missed a deadline, never lost a piece of equipment. That takes discipline most soldiers don't have." "That's different. That's paperwork." "It's the same mindset. Do the job. Don't overthink it. Trust your training." He stood up. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be long." After he left, Bryn lay down fully clothed. She didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion pulled her under sometime after midnight. She dreamed of mountains. Gray Montana mountains under a winter sky. Her father standing at the edge of the mine entrance, his back straight and strong, the way it used to be before the accident. He turned to look at her and opened his mouth to speak. Then she woke up. 0400 hours. Helicopter departure in 6 hours. The war was waiting. The Black Hawk helicopter cut through the darkness like a blade. Inside the cargo bay, 14 Navy SEALs sat in 2 rows facing each other, checking their weapons with mechanical efficiency. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the rotor blades chopping through the night air and the occasional crackle of radio communication between the pilots. Bryn sat near the rear, surrounded by warriors who'd done this hundreds of times. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced her breathing to stay steady. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way Sid had taught her. The desert stretched black and empty beneath them, visible only as darker shapes against a dark sky. Stars overhead burned with crystalline clarity. No moon tonight. That was intentional. Darkness was their ally. She checked her gear for the 100th time. 16 magazines for her M4, extra belts for the machine guns, medical trauma kit strapped to her thigh, 6 liters of water, and those 4 magazines of 7.62 for Finnegan's M110. M4 carbine loaded with a full magazine, safety engaged, barrel pointed down. Everything accounted for. Across from her sat Corporal Finnegan Maddox. Everyone called him Reaper, though Bryn didn't know why. He was 28 years old, from Montana like her, with a lean, weathered face and kind eyes that had seen too much. His primary weapon was an M110 SAS sniper rifle, the same precision weapon Sid had been training her on. Finnegan caught her looking and nodded once. No words needed, just acknowledgement between 2 people from the same cold mountains who'd somehow ended up in this hot desert preparing to do violence. The helicopter banked slightly, adjusting course. Bryn's stomach lurched. She gripped the seat harness and focused on breathing. Slowly. In and out. Lieutenant Bishop's voice came through everyone's headsets. Calm. Professional. 5 minutes to insertion. Final checks. The SEALs moved in perfect synchronization, checking magazines, adjusting night vision mounts, securing gear that might rattle or shift during movement. These men had done this hundreds of times. For them, this was routine. For Bryn, it was anything but. 2 minutes out, the crew chief moved to the open door, one hand gripping the overhead strap, scanning the darkness below through night vision goggles. The wind roared through the open bay. Cold air at 2,000 feet, even in Afghanistan. 1 minute, Bryn's hands were sweating inside her gloves. She flexed her fingers, trying to keep them loose. Ready. Then the world exploded. RPG! RPG! Brake right! The pilot's voice cracked with sudden urgency. The helicopter jerked violently sideways. Through the open door, Bryn saw streaks of light racing up from the darkness below. Tracer rounds, dozens of them. Green fingers reaching toward the aircraft with murderous intent. This wasn't supposed to happen. The intelligence briefing said the area would be clear until they reached the compound. Someone had gotten it wrong. Fatally wrong. A sound like thunder striking metal. The helicopter shuddered. Warning lights flashed red throughout the cabin. The smell of burning hydraulic fluid filled Bryn's nostrils, sharp and chemical. The aircraft spun. The horizon tilted at impossible angles. Bryn's head slammed against the bulkhead despite her harness. Stars exploded across her vision. Her ears filled with a high-pitched ringing that drowned out everything else. The ground rushed up to meet them. The pilot was fighting for control, pulling every trick he knew to keep them airborne. The Black Hawk leveled out at the last possible second, but the landing was brutal beyond anything Bryn had imagined. Impact, metal screaming, the aircraft bouncing once, twice, then sliding sideways across rocky sand. The sound was apocalyptic. Rotor blades disintegrating, structural supports bending, a dust cloud engulfing everything. Then stillness. Terrible, ringing stillness. Bryn's hands moved on autopilot. Unbuckle harness, grab rifle, check for injuries. Her head throbbed where she'd hit the bulkhead. Blood trickled from somewhere on her scalp. But she could move. She could think. The SEALs were already in motion, pouring out of the damaged helicopter into the night. Lieutenant Bishop was dragging the unconscious pilot from his seat. The co-pilot was bleeding from a head wound, but conscious enough to stumble. Bullets began snapping through the air, the distinctive crack of rounds passing close. Enemy fighters had seen the crash. They were moving in. Bryn stumbled out of the helicopter on legs that didn't feel entirely connected to her body. The desert stretched in all directions under a sky full of cold stars. Muzzle flashes sparked in the darkness about 180 yards west. She could hear shouting in a language she didn't understand. The SEALs established a defensive perimeter with practice speed. Lieutenant Bishop was everywhere at once, positioning men, directing fire, assessing the situation. One SEAL named Lachlan Griffin had the M240 Bravo machine gun up and running within seconds, pouring suppressive fire toward the enemy positions. Finnegan scrambled up onto a rocky outcropping 30 feet away. He set up his M110 SAS with quick, efficient movements. Within seconds, the rifle spoke. Boom! A deep sound that echoed across the desert. Through the darkness, an insurgent fell at a distance Bryn could barely see. Pause. 8 seconds. Boom! Another insurgent dropped. Finnegan had become their lifeline. As long as that rifle kept talking, it kept the enemy at a distance they couldn't effectively engage from. As long as those precise shots kept finding targets, the SEALs had breathing room. Bryn dropped to the sand beside a SEAL and opened her supply pack. This was her job: distribute ammunition, keep the fighters supplied. She crawled from position to position, delivering fresh magazines and collecting empties. Bullets kicked up sand around her. One round passed so close, she felt the displacement of air against her cheek. But she kept moving because this was what she trained for. This was why she'd volunteered. Do the job. Don't think. Just do the job. Finnegan's rifle continued its methodical work. Every 8 to 10 seconds, another boom, another insurgent eliminated. The precision fire was devastating. Every shot a kill. Every kill pushing the enemy back, making them hesitate, making them afraid. Bryn delivered ammunition to Griffin on the M240. He didn't even look at her, just grabbed the belt and kept firing. Brass casings ejected in a steady stream, piling up around his position. She moved to the next SEAL, delivered magazines, moved again. The training Sid had drilled into her took over. Stay low, move fast, don't present a target. Time became elastic. Minutes felt like hours, or maybe seconds, impossible to tell in the chaos. Then at 03:12 hours, everything changed. Finnegan shifted position to get a better angle on an insurgent machine gun nest that was beginning to find their range. He exposed himself for just a moment, just one moment. The crack of the incoming round was different from the others, sharper, more focused. An enemy sniper on the other side had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. The bullet found the gap between Finnegan's shoulder and his body armor plate. The impact spun him around and slammed him against the rocks. His M110 SAS clattered away across the stone. Blood began spreading dark across his uniform. "Reaper's hit! Reaper's hit!" Tobias was moving before Finnegan finished falling. The combat medic covered 30 feet in seconds, kit already in his hands. He reached Finnegan and immediately went to work. Pressure on the wound, packing it with quick clot gauze, starting an IV line with one hand while maintaining pressure with the other. Finnegan was conscious but in shock. Bryn could hear him from her position, voice tight with pain. "Can't shoot. Rifle. Someone needs to get on that rifle. Lieutenant Bishop's voice cut through the radio traffic, urgent but controlled. We need that gun position active. Maddox is down. Who can shoot? Silence on the net. The other SEALs were fully engaged in their sectors. Tobias was treating Finnegan. The pilots were wounded. And the enemy, sensing the loss of that devastating precision fire, were growing bolder, moving closer, their shots becoming more accurate. Bryn stared at the M110 SAS, lying abandoned on the rocks 30 feet away. Starlight glinted off the scope. That rifle had been controlling the entire battlefield. Every time it spoke, insurgents died, or took cover, or lost their courage. Now it sat silent. Through that rifle, Finnegan had protected everyone. Without it, they would be overrun within minutes. Sid's voice echoed in her memory. You're ready for more than you know. Bryn's body moved before her conscious mind caught up. She dropped her supply pack. Her legs carried her scrambling up the rocky outcropping toward Finnegan's position. She heard Lieutenant Bishop yell something behind her, but the words didn't register. There was only the rifle, only the need. Her hands closed around the M110 SAS, heavy, familiar from all those training sessions with Sid. But this wasn't the range at FOB Griffin. This was real. This was life and death. Bryn positioned herself exactly where Finnegan had been, behind the rocks. The elevated position gave her a clear view of the approaches. She pressed her eye to the scope, and the world magnified dramatically. Through that powerful optics, she could see everything. Individual faces 350 yards away, bearded men with wrapped keffiyehs and AK-47 rifles, young men and old men. Some looked scared, some looked determined. All of them were trying to kill her and everyone she was fighting alongside. Her hands were shaking. The crosshairs wavered wildly across her field of view. This was completely different from shooting paper targets. Real people were down there, real human beings with families and histories and futures. One of them was setting up a PKM machine gun behind a large rock. If that weapon opened fire, it would tear through the SEAL positions like a chainsaw through paper. Bryn centered the crosshairs on the fighter's chest. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She tried to remember everything Sid had taught her. Breathing, trigger control, follow through. Don't think about the target as a person. Focus on the mechanics, just muscle memory and practice. She took a breath, let half of it out, held the rest. Her finger took up the slack on the trigger. Smooth pressure, steady, steady. The rifle bucked hard against her shoulder. Boom! The sound echoed across the desert. Through the scope, she watched the insurgent drop. The PKM machine gun fell silent before it ever fired a shot. She had just killed a human being. Bryn waited for horror, for guilt, for some overwhelming emotional reaction. But there was only a strange numbness and the immediate urgent need to find the next target. Because people were depending on her. Because this was the moment. Because she was holding the line. Her hands worked the bolt, chambering a fresh round. The spent brass casing ejected and clinked against the rocks. She scanned for another threat. A fighter was running between positions, exposed. She led him slightly to account for his movement. Fired. He went down hard. The rifle became an extension of her body. Load, aim, breathe, fire. Each shot was a separate task requiring total concentration. She stopped thinking about the bigger picture. There was only the scope view and the trigger. Below her position, she heard Lieutenant Bishop on the radio. Surprise in his voice, but also approval. Calloway's on the gun. Someone got Calloway on the gun. She didn't respond. Didn't matter. All that mattered was the next shot. The enemy fighters began taking casualties from the elevated sniper position and realized the American sniper was active again. They became more cautious, staying behind cover, limiting exposure. This was exactly what the SEALs needed. Breathing room, a chance to reorganize. Bryn shifted her focus to high-value targets. An enemy commander directing fighters from behind a disabled vehicle. Range approximately 520 yards. Wind negligible. She adjusted her aim point slightly high to account for bullet drop. Held her breath. Fired. The commander dropped. The fighters around him scattered in confusion. Without clear leadership, their attack became disorganized. Some retreated, others continued forward but without coordination. Minutes blurred together. Bryn lost count of her shots. The rifle grew hot from repeated fire. We dripped into her eyes, making it hard to see through the scope. Her shoulder ached from the recoil, but she kept shooting because stopping meant dying. A bullet struck the rock inches from her head. Stone fragments sprayed across her face. She felt sharp stings as something cut her cheek. Blood ran down her neck, soaking into her collar. She shifted position slightly and kept firing. The wound didn't matter. Nothing mattered except maintaining this position. A fighter appeared at 400 yards, trying to flank the SEAL position. Bryn tracked him through the scope, calculated the lead time. Fired. He dropped mid-stride. Another insurgent raised an RPG launcher. Catastrophic if that weapon fired. Bryn put the crosshairs on his center mass. Squeezed. The insurgent collapsed before he could pull the trigger. Time stopped having meaning. There was only the rhythm. Acquire target, calculate distance, adjust for wind, breathe, fire, repeat. Her world had shrunk to the circle of the scope. Everything outside that circle ceased to exist. No fear, no doubt. Just the pure focus of someone doing exactly what they were meant to do. Sid had been right. This was what she was capable of. This was who she'd always been, waiting for circumstances to reveal it. Then she heard the most beautiful sound imaginable. The distinctive whoop, whoop, whoop of helicopter rotors. Bryn glanced up. Two Apache gunships streaked across the sky like avenging angels. Their presence changed everything instantly. The Apaches opened fire with devastating effect. 30mm chain guns producing that characteristic sound. Hydra rockets streaking from weapons pylons and exploding among the insurgent positions with tremendous violence. The enemy attack collapsed immediately. Fighters scattered and ran, trying to escape the aerial onslaught. It was over. Bryn lowered the rifle. Her entire body began trembling with adrenaline crash. Every muscle felt like water. She slumped against the rocks, suddenly aware of the blood on her face, the bruise blooming on her shoulder, the ringing in her ears. Lieutenant Bishop climbed up to her position. His face was covered in dust and sweat. Blood stained his uniform from wounds she hadn't noticed during the fight. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Respect, maybe, or disbelief. You hit? His voice was hoarse from shouting orders. Bryn wiped blood from her face with the back of her hand. Still holding together, sir. He nodded slowly. You gave us the breathing room we needed. Maddox owes you his life. He paused. We all do. That was all he said. But the weight behind those words was enormous. Coming from a SEAL team leader with 15 years of combat experience, those words meant everything. He turned and started climbing back down, stopped halfway, looked back at her. Maddox is stable. Merrick got him patched. You saved lives tonight, Calloway. Don't forget that. Then he was gone. Coordinating the extraction, directing his team, being the leader his men needed. Bryn sat alone on the rocks with Finnegan's rifle across her lap. Dawn was beginning to break in the east, the sky shifting from black to deep blue to orange, beautiful and terrible at the same time. She had killed people tonight, at least 8 that she could confirm, maybe more. The faces were already starting to blur together in her memory. Young men, old men, fighters who probably believed they were defending their homeland from invaders. She waited for the guilt to hit, the horror, the moral crisis that should come from taking human lives. But all she felt was exhausted numbness. And underneath that, something else. Something she didn't want to examine too closely. Satisfaction. The knowledge that she'd performed under extreme pressure, that her shots had been clean and precise, that she'd done exactly what needed doing. Was that wrong? Was she supposed to feel worse about it? The extraction helicopters came in loud and fast. Medevac birds with red crosses painted on their sides. A security team established a perimeter while medics rushed to the wounded. Finnegan went first. They had him on a stretcher, IV bags hanging from poles. Tobias walked alongside, still giving instructions despite his own injury. The SEAL sniper's face was pale from blood loss, but he was conscious. As they carried him past Bryn's position, he turned his head and caught her eye. He didn't say anything, just nodded once. Acknowledgement between two snipers. Recognition of what she'd done. Tobias appeared beside her before boarding the helicopter. He took Finnegan's rifle from her hands gently, reverently. Maddox is going to want to thank you himself when he's out of surgery. Tobias's face was gray with pain, but his eyes were clear. You pulled our asses out of the fire, Calloway. Don't let anybody tell you different. He limped toward the helicopter, turned back once more. Also, you might want to see the doc about that concussion. You've got a serious head wound bleeding all over the place. Bryn touched her scalp. Her hand came away crimson. She hadn't even noticed. Funny how pain became irrelevant when you were fighting for survival. The flight back to FOB Griffin took 20 minutes. Bryn sat in the helicopter staring out the open door. The battlefield receded below. Bodies scattered across the sand. Smoke rising from destroyed vehicles. Brass casings glinting in the early sunlight. Evidence of violence that would be covered by desert sand within days. She thought about the faces she'd seen through the scope. Wondered if they had families, children, people who would grieve them. Then she pushed those thoughts away because that path led to madness, to paralysis, to an inability to function. Sid had warned her about this. The weight you carry, the faces you see in the dark, the price of doing what needed doing. She hadn't understood then, but she was beginning to understand now. Back at FOB Griffin, everything happened in a blur. Medical processing, a doctor shining lights in her eyes and asking questions about the date and her name and how many fingers he was holding up. 8 stitches in her cheek, 12 more in her scalp, anti-nausea medication for the concussion, orders for 48 hours rest. Bryn nodded and agreed to everything. Then she went to her bunk and lay down fully clothed and stared at the ceiling while her mind replayed every shot in photographic detail. Face number 1, young man with a wispy beard, maybe 20 years old, setting up the PKM. Dropped by her first shot, center mass, clean kill. Face number 2, runner between positions, mid-30s, scarred face visible even at 300 yards. Led him perfectly, dropped him mid-stride. Face number 3, the commander. Gray in his beard, authority in his posture. Eliminated, and the entire attack collapsed. How many more? She'd lost count after 7 or 8, but each face was burned into her memory with perfect clarity. Young and old, scared and determined, all dead by her hand. Sleep wouldn't come, not even close. Her body was exhausted, but her mind raced like an engine stuck in high gear. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the scope view, crosshairs settling on human targets, the kick of recoil, the knowledge that another person had stopped existing because of her actions. At 0400, she gave up trying to sleep, walked to the shower facility in the pre-dawn darkness. The water ran scalding hot. She stood under it until her skin turned red, scrubbed at the dried blood in her hair, watched pink water swirl down the drain. She scrubbed until her skin felt raw, until the water ran clear, but she still didn't feel clean. Wondered if she ever would again. The mess hall was nearly empty at 0530. Bryn poured herself a cup of coffee that tasted like battery acid and motor oil. Sat at a corner table watching the sunrise over the blast barriers. Other soldiers filtered in gradually. Some glanced at her. Word had already spread about what happened during Operation Valkyrie, about the logistics specialist who became a sniper. She was no longer invisible, No longer just the quiet girl who counted bullets. People saw her differently now, saw someone who had stepped up when it mattered, saw a warrior. The attention made her want to disappear. She wasn't a warrior. She was someone who'd picked up a rifle because there was no other choice. Someone who'd done what needed doing and now had to live with the consequences. Footsteps approached. She looked up and saw Sid standing beside her table. He didn't ask permission, just sat down heavily, his bad legs stretched out to the side. His weathered face showed deep concern. "How you holding up, kid?" Bryn shrugged, sipped her terrible coffee. "I'm fine." "That's a lie." Sid's voice was gentle but firm. "Nobody's fine after their first combat. Not ever." They sat in silence for a while, the mess hall gradually filling with morning personnel, voices and clatter of trays, the normal sounds of military life continuing despite the violence that had happened just hours ago. Finally, Sid spoke again. "Grenada, 1983. I was 37 years old. First time I killed someone through a scope." Bryn looked at him. He was staring at his coffee cup like it held answers. "Insurgent at 600 yards. Clear shot. Perfect conditions. I pulled the trigger and he dropped." Sid's jaw tightened. "Then I threw up behind my position, heaved my guts out while my spotter pretended not to notice." He looked up at her. His eyes were wet. Nightmares for months, his face on repeat, wondering if I could have wounded him instead. Wondering if he had kids, if his wife would cry when she learned he was dead. He paused. The guilt nearly broke me. Bryn felt something loosen in her chest. The knowledge that this legendary instructor had experienced the same horror she was feeling. "Does it get easier?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "No." Sid's answer was immediate and honest. "It never gets easier. But you learn to carry the weight better. You learn to put those faces in a box and only open it when you can handle it." He leaned forward. "Here's what matters. You did the right thing for the right reasons. Those men were trying to kill your team. You protected them. That's not murder. That's war. And war is ugly and horrible, but sometimes necessary." "I keep seeing them," Bryn whispered. "Every time I close my eyes." "You will for a long time, maybe forever." Sid reached across and gripped her hand. "But you're still you. You're still the girl from Montana who counts bullets and takes pride in doing things right. What you did last night doesn't erase that. It adds to it." He pulled back, took a drink of coffee, made a face at the taste. "I lost my daughter because I never learned to process this stuff, never talked about it, kept it locked inside until it poisoned everything." His voice cracked. "Don't make my mistakes, Bryn. Don't let this consume you." The use of her first name hit different. He'd always called her Calloway or Kid. This felt personal, like a father talking to a daughter. Tears ran down his weathered cheeks. "Teaching you has been the closest thing to redemption I'll ever get. Watching you discover what you're capable of, seeing you become something extraordinary." He looked at her directly. "That matters to me more than you'll ever know." Bryn felt her own eyes filling. "I almost got people killed. I froze for a second before I picked up that rifle." "But you didn't freeze long. You acted. And that action saved Maddox's life, saved Merrick, saved Bishop and his entire team." Sid's voice was fierce. "1 second of hesitation is human. What matters is what you did after." They sat together as the sun climbed higher. Sid shared more stories. His first kill, his worst kill, the men he'd lost, the weight he carried every day. He spoke with brutal honesty about the cost of being a sniper, the faces that never left, the moral calculus of taking life to protect life. And slowly, Bryn began to understand that what she felt wasn't wrong. It was the price of doing something that mattered, the cost of being someone who stood when others needed you to stand. "What do I do now?" she asked finally. "You keep moving forward, one day at a time. You process what happened, you acknowledge the weight, and you decide what kind of person you want to be going forward." He stood up stiffly. I've got to file some paperwork, but I want you to think about something. You discovered last night that you're capable of things most people aren't. The question is whether you develop that capability or walk away from it. He walked away before she could respond, left her sitting alone with her thoughts and her terrible coffee. The next 3 days passed in a haze. Bryn tried returning to her logistics duties, sat in the supply depot staring at spreadsheets. But the numbers felt meaningless now. The spreadsheets stared back at her, meaningless rows of data. Somewhere out there, SEALs were running missions. Rangers were clearing compounds, and she was counting bullets she'd already proven she could fire better than most. The decision had already been made. She just hadn't admitted it yet. On the 4th day after the mission, Lieutenant Bishop requested a formal meeting. Bryn reported to his office at 1400 hours. Her stomach churned with nervousness. She didn't know what to expect. Bishop's office was spare and organized. Maps on the walls. A single photograph of him with his SEAL team. No personal effects beyond that. He gestured for her to sit. "How are you healing up?" Straight to business. No small talk. "Stitches itch. Concussions better. Cleared for duty." He nodded, shuffled some papers on his desk, then looked at her directly. "I'm recommending you for the Bronze Star with Valor device. Your actions during Operation Valkyrie saved multiple lives. Without someone manning that sniper position after Maddox went down, we'd have been overrun." Bryn opened her mouth to protest, but he held up a hand. "I've written hundreds of award citations. I know what merits recognition. What you did was exceptional. Period." He leaned back. "But that's not why I called you here." He picked up a folder. "I've been reviewing your training records, your performance scores, your evaluations from Master Sergeant Lancaster." He looked at her. "You have natural talent as a marksman, significant talent, the kind that shouldn't be wasted counting supplies." Here it comes, Bryn thought. The offer, the choice. "Have you ever considered transferring to a combat specialty? Sniper school? Precision marksman courses?" "I've thought about it," Bryn kept her voice neutral. "But I like logistics. It's important work. I'm good at it." "You're adequate at logistics. You're exceptional at shooting." Bishop's voice was firm. "Combat doesn't care about your job title. When the situation demands action, you either step up or people die. You stepped up. That shows character, shows courage." He set down the folder. "I'll support whatever decision you make. If you want to stay in logistics, that's your right. But I want you to really think about this. Not knee-jerk fear, actual consideration of what you're capable of." "How much time do I have to decide?" "1 week. After that, I need an answer." He stood, indicating the meeting was over. "Talk to people you trust. Think it through. Then make the choice you can live with." Bryn left his office and walked across the base. Her feet didn't carry her to the supply depot this time. They carried her to the memorial wall, to the names of soldiers who died protecting others. She thought about Finnegan on that stretcher, about Tobias treating wounds under fire, about Bishop and his team who would have died without someone on that rifle. That evening, she found Tobias at the medical facility. He was treating a soldier with a sprained ankle when she arrived. After finishing, he waved her into his small office. They sat surrounded by medical supplies and anatomy posters. Tobias looked tired, but healthier. His leg wound was healing, though he still moved with a slight limp. "What's on your mind, Calloway?" She explained everything. Bishop's offer, the choice between safety and purpose, the fear of becoming someone who killed easily, the fear of wasting her talent. Tobias listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I joined as a regular medic. No combat aspirations. Just wanted to help people. Then my first deployment, we got hit hard. Mass casualty event. I found myself treating wounds under fire. Bullets everywhere. People screaming. Total chaos." He looked at his hands. "And I was good at it, staying calm when everything went to hell, making triage decisions in seconds. I saved 11 people that day, lost 3. What did you do after? Bryn asked quietly. Trained as a combat medic. Never looked back, because I discovered something about myself. I'm not just good under pressure. I'm necessary. My skills save lives. How could I walk away from that? He leaned forward. The question isn't whether you can do the job. You proved that already. The question is whether you want to. Only you can answer that. Bryn left the medical facility and walked the perimeter of the base. Watched the sun set over the desert. Called home on the satellite phone. Her mother answered on the third ring. Honey, are you okay? You sound tired. I'm fine, Mom. Just been busy. Bryn couldn't tell her about the mission, about the kills, about any of it. How's Dad? Same as always. Back still bothers him. He's watching TV right now. Want to talk to him? No, that's okay. Just wanted to hear your voice. They talked about nothing for 20 minutes. Her brother's community college classes, the weather back in Montana, neighbors' gossip, normal life continuing in a world that felt impossibly far away. After hanging up, Bryn felt crushing isolation. Her family would never understand what she'd experienced. They couldn't. How could she explain firing a rifle at human targets? How could she describe the weight of watching people die by her hand? Some experiences separated you from the people you loved, created chasms that couldn't be crossed with words. She was alone with this decision, truly alone. The next morning she found Hewitt at the motor pool. He was under a Humvee, tools scattered around him. Devereaux! He rolled out from under the vehicle, looked up at her. His face was streaked with grease. Calloway, he sat up. Heard Bishop offered you sniper school. Word travels fast. Always does. He wiped his hands on a rag. You thinking about taking it? Maybe. Hewitt stood up, looked at her directly. Listen, I was wrong about you. What I said in the mess hall, all that bullshit about princess paperwork and throwing spreadsheets. He paused. You're the real deal. What you did out there, that's warrior shit, and I respect that. He extended his hand. You earned it. Bryn shook it. Thank you, Sergeant. You should take the school, Hewitt said. Don't waste that talent counting bullets when you could be using them to save lives. We need more people like you out there, people who can actually shoot when it matters. It was the first genuine respect from the man who'd mocked her, earned through action, not words. That night, Bryn sat on her bunk with Sid's leather notebook open in her lap. She read through his lessons, his observations, his hard-won wisdom. On the last page, she read his inscription again. You'll hit a wall. Everyone does. When you want to quit, remember, the only failure is stopping before you're finished. She thought about Finnegan on that stretcher, about Tobias treating wounds under fire, about Bishop and his team who would have died without someone on that rifle. She thought about her father in Montana with his ruined back, about working in the copper mine because it was what needed doing, about sacrifice and duty and the weight of responsibility. She thought about who she'd been before the crash and who she'd become during those minutes on the rocks. The decision crystallized, not all at once, but slowly, like dawn breaking over the desert. The next morning, she walked into Lieutenant Bishop's office. He looked up from his paperwork. I want sniper school, sir, if the offer still stands. Bishop's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Satisfaction, maybe, or validation. Already started the paperwork, had a feeling you'd make the right choice. The humidity hit Bryn like a physical wall. After months in the Afghan desert, breathing through wet wool felt suffocating. Rain fell in cold sheets. Everything was green and dense and alien. The training area stretched across wooded terrain that bore no resemblance to the arid landscape where she'd learned to shoot. She reported carrying a single duffel bag and Sid's leather notebook. 25 other students stood in formation outside the sniper school headquarters. Most were men, infantry veterans with multiple deployments, Rangers with combat patches on their shoulders, Marines who looked like they'd been carved from granite. 2 other women stood in the formation, One was tall and angular with short blonde hair. The other was compact and muscular with dark skin. They didn't acknowledge each other. Nobody acknowledged anybody. Everyone was too busy sizing up the competition. A man emerged from the headquarters building. He moved with the economical grace of someone who'd spent decades in combat. Mid-40s, scarred face, nose that had been broken multiple times, missing his left pinky finger. His eyes were hard and evaluative. "I am Sergeant First Class Declan Ross. I will be your lead instructor for the next 7 weeks." His voice carried across the formation without shouting. "I don't give a damn about your background, your rank, or your gender. You are all equally worthless until you prove otherwise through performance." He paced along the formation, stopped in front of a muscular ranger who stood at rigid attention. "This course has a 70% failure rate. Most of you will wash out. That's not a threat, it's a statistical fact." He resumed pacing. "You will be pushed past your limits, sleep-deprived, underfed, tested in ways that will break your body and your mind. The question is whether you have the will to continue when every fiber of your being wants to quit." He stopped at the center of the formation. "There are no participation trophies here. No credit for trying. You either meet the standard or you fail. Welcome to hell." The first week focused on marksmanship fundamentals. 300-yard qualification on day 1. 8 out of 10 hits minimum to continue. Bryn watched 3 students fail immediately. Their shots scattered across the targets in patterns that revealed fundamental flaws in technique. They were recycled to remedial training. Might rejoin a later class. Probably wouldn't. Bryn shot perfect, 10 out of 10. The blonde woman also shot perfect. They made eye contact for the first time. Brief acknowledgement, no words needed. Ross walked the line, checking targets. He paused at Bryn's, studied the tight grouping, looked at her face with its healing scar from the stone fragments. He said nothing, just moved on. But she saw recognition in his eyes. He knew she'd seen combat. The weapons education was exhaustive. M24 sniper weapon system, bolt action, 7.62 millimeter NATO, effective range 800 meters. They stripped it down and reassembled it blindfolded, learned every component, every failure point, how to clear malfunctions in the dark. The M110 SAS felt familiar in Bryn's hands. She'd fired Finnegan's rifle under the worst conditions imaginable. This classroom version felt tame by comparison. She worked the action with confidence that came from experience purchased in blood. Week 2 introduced fieldcraft, constructing ghillie suits from burlap and natural vegetation. Bryn's methodical nature served her well. She measured thread spacing with precision, matched colors exactly to the Georgia vegetation, created a suit that blended seamlessly with the forest floor. Ross examined her work. "This looks like something from a museum. Well done, Calloway." First praise she'd heard from him, it felt like winning a medal. Then came stalking exercises, the moment where confidence turned to hubris. The objective seemed straightforward. Move 150 meters through wooded terrain toward 2 Walker instructors who were actively searching for students. Reach a firing position undetected. Time limit, 3 hours. Bryn had shot perfect all week. She'd constructed the best ghillie suit in the class. She'd proven herself under actual combat conditions. This exercise felt almost trivial by comparison. She moved too fast, impatient to demonstrate her skill, confident that her natural talent would carry her through. At 100 meters, a Walker blew his whistle. Sharp, loud, final. "Busted. Stand up, student." Bryn stood. Mud and leaves fell from her ghillie suit. Her face burned with humiliation. The Walker approached. He was older, gray in his hair, eyes that had seen everything and were unimpressed by all of it. "What's your name?" "Calloway, Sergeant." "Well, Calloway, you just got yourself and your entire team killed. Your impatience, your overconfidence, your failure to respect the fundamentals." He pointed back toward the start line. Walk back and think about what you did wrong. The walk of shame took forever. Other students watched from concealment. She felt their eyes tracking her, felt their judgment. The combat veteran who couldn't handle a basic stalking exercise. Ross waited at the start line. His expression was worse than anger. It was disappointment. "What happened out there, Calloway?" "I moved too fast, Sergeant First Class. I was overconfident." "Yes, you were." He crossed his arms. "Combat gave you a false sense of capability. You think because you performed once under fire, you've mastered the fundamentals. You haven't. You got lucky, and luck runs out." The words hit harder than any curse would have because they were true. That night, Bryn lay in her bunk replaying the failure. The whistle, the walk back, Ross's disappointment. She'd proven herself in Afghanistan only to fail at a training exercise. What did that say about her actual skill level? Maybe she didn't belong here after all. The next morning, a student approached her at breakfast. He was older than most, early 30s, infantry veteran based on his unit patch, lean and weathered with kind eyes. "Saw you get walked yesterday. I'm Brick Cohen. Everyone calls me Brick." He sat down without asking. "Happened to me on my first attempt too. Happens to most people." "How'd you pass the retest?" "Slowed down, trusted the process." He took a bite of terrible scrambled eggs. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. Rushing gets you killed, or in this case, walked. Over the next 3 days, Bryn practiced obsessively, spent 8 hours in the woods, moving at glacial pace, lay motionless in underbrush while mosquitoes covered every exposed inch of skin, didn't scratch, didn't move, just breathed and waited and learned patience at a cellular level. Sid's words echoed in her memory. Patience defeats panic. The retest came on January 2nd. Same course, same walkers, different Bryn. She took 2 hours and 40 minutes to cover 150 meters, moved 6 inches at a time at her slowest points, froze completely when walkers passed within 10 feet, became part of the forest rather than something moving through it. She reached the firing position undetected, set up behind her rifle, acquired the target through her scope. Perfect. Ross was waiting at the extraction point. He looked at her differently now. The disappointment was gone, replaced by something harder to define. Respect, maybe. Better, much better. He actually smiled. Small, brief, but genuine. You learned the lesson. Week 3 brought sleep deprivation. Random wake-ups at 0200, 0330, 0445. Surprise drills in full gear. 4-mile runs followed immediately by weapons qualification. The purpose was testing whether they could maintain shooting accuracy while exhausted. Bryn discovered that exhaustion made everything harder. Her hands shook, her vision blurred. Simple calculations took twice as long. But Sid had trained her for this, had pushed her in those evening sessions until she could barely stand. The muscle memory remained even when conscious thought failed. Students continued dropping. Week 3, 26 became 21. Injuries took 2. Voluntary withdrawals took 2. Academic failure took 1 who simply couldn't calculate windage under pressure. Bryn watched each departure with mixed feelings. Relief that she was still here. Fear that she might be next. Week 4 introduced nutritional restriction. MREs only. Deliberate calorie deficit. Simulating field conditions where food was limited, and the mission continued regardless. Bryn lost 8 pounds in 2 weeks. Her uniforms hung loose. Her face became gaunt, but her shooting remained precise. Week 5 brought urban operations, mock-up city terrain with 3-story buildings and narrow alleys, limited sight lines, moving vehicles, pop-up targets that appeared and disappeared in seconds. This was where Bryn's mathematical mind excelled, calculating angles through building windows, compensating for elevation changes, reading wind patterns disrupted by urban canyons. 3rd floor window, 15-degree downward angle. 280 meters. Wind negligible in the urban corridor. She made the calculations automatically. Fired. Perfect hit. Ross watched from behind. Your mind works fast. Good instincts for geometry. Then came the critical test. January 24th. 10 shots. 10 different urban scenarios. Must hit 8 out of 10 minimum to continue. Bryn approached the firing line feeling good. Confident but not overconfident. She'd learned that lesson. Shot 1. Hit clean. Shot 2. Hit. Shot 3. Miss. She'd misjudged wind through a building gap. The bullet went 6 inches right. She felt panic rising. Pushed it down. Breathed. Refocused. Shot 4. Hit. Shot 5. Miss. She flinched on the trigger. Pulled instead of squeezed. Rookie mistake from someone who should know better. The panic grew stronger. 2 misses already. Could only afford 1 more. Shot 6. Miss. Complete mental blank. Forgot to compensate for elevation. The bullet struck 2 feet low. 3 misses. 7 out of 10. Failure. Bryn lowered the rifle, feeling numb. Around her, other students were finishing their qualifications. Brick shot 9 out of 10. The blonde woman shot perfect again. But Bryn had failed. Ross approached. He didn't yell, didn't curse, just looked at her with that devastating disappointment. See me after formation, Calloway. The rest of the day passed in a fog. Classes on range estimation. Practical exercises on wind reading. Bryn went through the motions, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying those 3 missed shots, analyzing what went wrong, understanding that the problem wasn't technical, it was mental. She choked under pressure. After formation, she reported to Ross's office. He sat behind a desk covered in paperwork and range cards, gestured for her to sit. You want to tell me what happened out there? I choked, Sergeant First Class. Lost focus. Made mistakes I shouldn't make. Why? His eyes were sharp, probing. You performed under actual combat conditions. You've killed enemy fighters while bullets were flying at you. Why did a simple qualification break you? Bryn didn't have an answer. Or rather, she had one but didn't want to admit it. I don't know, Sergeant First Class. Yes, you do. He leaned forward. You're exhausted, sleep-deprived, undernourished. Your body is breaking down and your mind is following. This is exactly what the course is designed to do. Find your breaking point. See if you quit or push through. He stood up. You have 1 retest opportunity tomorrow. Same qualification. If you fail again, you're recycled. Might join the next class, might not. Up to you to decide if you have what it takes. Bryn left his office feeling hollow. Walked back to the barracks in the cold rain. Other students were studying or cleaning weapons or sleeping. She sat on her bunk and stared at the wall. She could quit, just walk away. Tell them this wasn't for her. Go back to logistics and count bullets and live a safe, predictable life. Nobody would blame her. Sniper school defeated better soldiers than her every single week. At 2100 hours, she pulled out Sid's notebook. Flipped through pages of wisdom accumulated over 25 years, wind drift calculations, range estimation techniques, notes on breath control. On the inside back cover, she found the inscription she'd read a dozen times. But tonight, the words hit different. Bryn, you'll hit a wall. Everyone does. When you want to quit, remember, the only failure is stopping before you're finished. Everything else is just a temporary setback. You've got this. You've always had this. He'd known. Before she'd even left Afghanistan. He'd known she would reach this moment. This crisis point where quitting seemed easier than continuing. And he'd left her this message. This reminder that failure was only permanent if she chose to make it so. Bryn stood up, grabbed her rifle case, walked out into the rain toward the night range. The range safety wasn't expecting anyone, but he unlocked the facility without question. She spent 2 hours in the darkness running dry fire drills. No ammunition, just mechanics. Breathing, trigger press, follow through, over and over until the movements felt automatic again, until her mind quieted and her body remembered what it knew. At 01:30, she returned to the barracks, slept for 3 hours, best sleep she'd had in days. The retest qualification happened at 0800. Same course, same scenarios, different Bryn. She approached it like she'd approached that stalking retest. Slow, methodical, no rushing, no panic, just fundamentals executed with precision. Shot 1, hit. Shot 2, hit. Shot 3, hit. Compensated properly for win this time. Shot 4, hit. Shot 5, hit. Smooth trigger press, no flinch. Shot 6, hit. Perfect elevation compensation. She continued through all 10 shots, 10 hits, perfect score. Ross examined her target, looked at her face, nodded once. There's the shooter I expected. Don't disappear again. Week 6 brought advanced fieldcraft, multi-day exercises with minimal support. Students operated in pairs, conducting simulated missions across Georgia backwoods. Bryn partnered with Brick. They worked well together. His infantry experience complemented her precision shooting. Her mathematical calculations helped him with navigation. They spent 48 hours in the field with limited food and no sleep, moved through terrain while instructors actively hunted them, set up firing positions and engaged targets at extreme range, extracted without detection. Brick noticed the change in her. You're different after that qualification failure, steadier somehow. Had to break before I could be whole, Bryn said, scanning their route with binoculars. Needed to remember I'm not special. Just someone willing to do the work. That's exactly what makes you special, Brick said quietly. Week 7 brought the final exercise, the culmination of everything they'd learned. 48-hour partner operation, real-world scenario as realistic as training could make it. Bryn and Brick received their briefing at 2100 hours on February 3rd. Infiltrate simulated enemy compound. Identify specific targets. Engage from concealment at ranges exceeding 300 meters. Exfiltrate undetected while Walker instructors actively hunted them. Failure meant recycling the entire course. 7 weeks of suffering for nothing. They inserted at night. Georgia woods at 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Light rain. Visibility minimal. 4 miles to the compound through terrain that would conceal or reveal them depending on their skill. Bryn led navigation, used terrain features in pace count. No GPS, no electronic aids, just map and compass and decades-old techniques that still worked. They moved at glacial pace, 6 hours to cover 4 miles. Walkers passed within 20 feet multiple times. Never saw them. At 0300 on February 4th, they reached their overwatch position, 380 meters from the compound. Good concealment, multiple routes for exfiltration. They settled into their hide site and waited. 11.5 hours, motionless. Rain continued. Temperature dropped to 35. Bryn's body went numb from cold and immobility. Didn't matter. Patience defeats panic. Brick struggled more. Infantry guys were used to movement, decisive action. Waiting without purpose went against their nature. But he trusted the process, stayed still, let the discomfort exist without fighting it. At 14:30 hours, their target appeared. Role player in compound courtyard. Range confirmed at 382 meters. Wind pushing left to right at 6 miles per hour. Temperature and humidity already calculated. Bryn made the final adjustments. Windage compensation. Elevation. Breathing slowed to almost nothing. Crosshairs settled. Finger took up trigger slack. The shot broke clean. Through the scope, she watched the simulation round strike center mass. Perfect. Brick followed 8 seconds later, also perfect. They immediately began exfiltration. Walkers would converge on the compound within minutes. Had to move fast, but remain undetected. 8 miles to extraction point via a longer, more concealed route. Bryn and Brick moved like ghosts, used every bit of terrain, every shadow, every fold in the ground. Walkers passed them multiple times, once within 5 feet, never saw them. They reached extraction at 2200 hours, 14 hours after insertion, completely undetected. Mission complete. The observer instructor at extraction actually smiled. That was textbook, one of the best stalking and shooting combinations I've seen in recent classes. Well done. Graduation day arrived February 8th, cold and clear. 26 students had started. 9 stood in formation to receive their sniper tabs. 65% failure rate, higher than average. This had been a particularly brutal class. Bryn stood at attention as the commander approached. He pinned the tab to her uniform, small piece of cloth that represented 7 weeks of suffering, hundreds of hours of training, pushing past every limit she thought she had. Congratulations, Specialist Calloway. You are now a qualified United States Army sniper. Her parents watched via video link. Her mother cried. Her father sat speechless. Her brother sent a text that made her laugh. You're officially the scariest person I know. After the ceremony, Lieutenant Bishop appeared. She hadn't known he was coming. The SEAL team leader had flown from California specifically for her graduation. SEALs don't forget debts. He handed her a challenge coin. SEAL Trident on one side, team number on the other. You saved Maddox's life. Mine. Everyone's. That makes you family. Always. He offered his hand. She shook it. Doors open. If you ever want to join our world, just say the word. I appreciate it, sir, but I found my path. He nodded, understood, respected it. A familiar voice called from behind. Heard someone graduated sniper school. Bryn turned. Corporal Finnegan Maddox stood there in dress uniform. His left arm still in a sling, but standing tall. The Montana sniper who'd been hit in Operation Valkyrie, whose rifle she'd picked up. Reaper. She hadn't known he'd come. Took a while to track you down. Wanted to say thank you in person. You gave me a chance to see my kids grow up. That matters more than you know. They shook hands. 2 snipers, Montana-born, forged in the same fire. You earned this. Finnegan handed her something. His M110 SAS scope ring, the one from that night. Battle-scarred metal. Carried this through 3 deployments. Figure you earned the right to carry it forward. Bryn's throat tightened. I can't take this. Already got a new one, he smiled. Besides, every time you look through a scope, you'll remember. We hold the line, all of us. He saluted once, then walked away. That evening, Bryn called Afghanistan on a satellite phone. It took 15 minutes to get connected to FOB Griffin. Another 10 to locate Sid. When his gravelly voice finally came through, she felt tears burning. Sergeant Lancaster, it's Calloway, sir. Just wanted to let you know I graduated. 9 out of 26 made it. I was one of them. Silence on the line. Then his voice came back thick with emotion. Told you so. Knew you had it. He paused. I'm proud of you, Bryn. Your father should be too. I almost quit, Sergeant. Week 5. I was ready to walk away. But you didn't. That's what matters. You chose to stay. Another pause. Now go save some lives. That's an order. Yes, Sergeant. And Calloway, thank you for letting me be part of this, for giving me a chance to do it right with someone. His voice cracked. Bryn understood. She'd given him redemption, a chance to mentor someone properly, to do for her what he'd failed to do for his own daughter. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. They talked for another 10 minutes. Then static consumed the connection, and he was gone. Bryn received deployment orders the next day. 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, precision marksman attached to direct action teams. Deploy date, April 2013. Back to Afghanistan. She was going home. Full circle to the place where this had started, where she discovered what she was capable of becoming. The months between graduation and deployment passed in intensive additional training, advanced urban operations, helicopter insertions, vehicle interdiction, every scenario the Rangers might encounter. Bryn absorbed it all. She deployed in April, landed at Bagram Air Base, and immediately felt the familiar weight, the heat, the dust, the smell of diesel and cordite in war. But this time, she wasn't counting bullets. She was using them. Her first mission came within a week. Overwatch position during a high-value target raid, 600 meters from the objective, protecting her team from concealment. Through the scope, she watched Rangers flow through the compound with practiced efficiency, watched for threats, waited with infinite patience. A fighter emerged on a rooftop with an RPG. She saw him before anyone else could react. Calculated range and wind automatically. Fired. He dropped. The RPG never launched. The raid continued without complications. Lieutenant Bishop's words proved true. This was her path, protecting teammates from positions they couldn't see, making shots they couldn't make, being the guardian angel they didn't know was watching. Over the following months, Bryn conducted dozens of missions. Each one reinforced what she'd learned. Patience, precision, purpose. She carried Sid's notebook on every operation, added her own observations, her own lessons learned, began writing wisdom to pass forward someday. In October, an email came from Fort Benning Personnel Office. Master Sergeant Silas Lancaster had died. Heart attack in his sleep, October 12th, age 68, no family to notify. Bryn was listed as emergency contact. She sat in her bunk holding the printed email, read it 5 times, felt the grief settle like a physical weight in her chest. Sid was gone. The man who'd believed in her, who'd given her permission to be more than she thought she could be, who'd seen her as the daughter he'd lost. She requested emergency leave. Denied. Active deployment, mission-critical personnel couldn't be spared. Instead, she wrote him a letter, 10 pages of everything she wanted to say, everything he'd meant, how he'd changed her life, how she carried his lessons every single day, how she thought of him as the father figure her own injured, distant father had never been. She burned the letter in a trash can outside her bunk, watched the pages curl and blacken, sent the smoke up to wherever he was, hoped somehow he knew. She kept his notebook, carried it on every mission, the leather cover growing more worn with each deployment, a physical connection to the man who'd changed everything. That night, reading by flashlight, she found a notation she'd missed before, hidden on a page discussing windage calculations, written in margin, different ink, added later. Bryn, if you're reading this after I'm gone, know this. You gave me the redemption I needed. I couldn't save my daughter, but teaching you let me save someone. You're the second chance I didn't deserve. I'm proud of you. Always was, always will be. Dated September 11th, 2012. The day before Operation Valkyrie. He'd written it knowing she might not come back, knowing he might not be there when she returned, making sure she knew what she meant to him. Bryn pressed the notebook to her chest and let herself cry. For the first time since the crash, for the first time since the kills, for the first time since everything changed, she cried for Sid, for herself, for the girl from Montana who'd counted bullets, and the woman who now made them count, for the weight she carried, and the lives she'd saved, and the price of becoming someone extraordinary. In December, her unit rotation brought her back to FOB Griffin for resupply and rest. The base had changed, new faces, new buildings, but the memorial wall remained. She found Sid's name on a new brass plaque. Master Sergeant Silas Lancaster, 25 years of service, Grenada, 1983, Panama, 1989, Gulf War, 1991. She stood at attention, saluted formally, whispered words only he would hear. I made you proud, Sergeant. I'm holding the line, just like you taught me. Hewitt found her at the memorial, stood beside her, Removed his cover in respect. Heard about Lancaster. Sorry for your loss. Pause. He was a good man. Better than I gave him credit for. Another pause. Better than I gave you credit for. He looked at her. I was wrong, Calloway. About a lot of things. You're not Princess Paperwork. You're a goddamn warrior. And Lancaster saw that before any of us. He saw potential in everyone, Sergeant, even in people who doubted themselves. Hewitt nodded. That's the mark of a real leader. They stood together in silence, two soldiers honoring a fallen mentor. 3 weeks later, Bryn found an envelope on her bunk. No name, no return address. Inside, a single photograph. Hewitt stood in a motor pool somewhere, arm around a young woman in army fatigues. His daughter, based on the resemblance. Same square jaw, same determined eyes. On the back, Hewitt's blocky handwriting. Told her about you, about what real warriors look like. She ships to basic next month. Thanks for showing this old dog what he was too stubborn to see. HD. Bryn tucked the photo into Sid's notebook, between the pages on wind drift and range estimation. Another thread in the tapestry, another person choosing to become more than they thought they could be. The legacy wasn't just vertical, teacher to student, it was horizontal too, spreading outward in ways she'd never see. In January 2014, Bryn received new orders. Assistant instructor for basic marksmanship, training new soldiers, passing forward the knowledge that had been given to her. Her first class included a nervous logistics specialist from Tennessee, Private Elena Reeves, 22 years old, uncertain, capable of more than she knew. Bryn handed her an M4 carbine. Let's see what you've got. Elena's first grouping was tight, natural talent visible immediately. She looked up, surprised. I didn't know I could do that. Most people don't know what they're capable of until circumstances demand it. Bryn smiled, remembering herself 18 months ago. You're different. Natural shooter. That's rare. Over the following weeks, Bryn worked with Elena, saw the same progression she'd experienced. Uncertainty becoming confidence, fear becoming purpose. A logistics specialist discovering she could be more. One evening after training, Bryn gave Elena a small notebook, new one, leather cover. Inside, she'd written lessons from Sid's notebook and lessons from her own experience. The cover inscription read, "Patience defeats panic. Hesitation kills. When the moment comes, you pull the trigger. Everyone holds the line when needed." Elena opened it carefully, flipped through pages filled with calculations, sketches, handwritten wisdom. Her eyes widened as she recognized what she was holding. Sergeant Calloway, I don't understand. Why me? Because 2 years ago, someone saw potential in me I didn't see in myself. Gave me permission to be more than I thought possible. Now I'm giving you that same permission. Elena looked down at the notebook, then back up at Bryn. Her eyes were wet. What if I'm not ready? Nobody's ready. You just become ready by doing. Bryn paused, remembering Sid's weathered face in the sunset. The man who gave me his notebook died before I could tell him what it meant to me. Don't make that mistake. When you find someone who believes in you, you hold on to that. You honor it by becoming everything they saw in you. Elena nodded, clutching the notebook to her chest like Bryn had clutched Sid's that night before the mission. Bryn started to walk away, then stopped. Oh, and Elena, when you get to sniper school, and you will, remember, patience defeats panic. She left Elena standing there, holding the notebook with reverent care. That evening, Bryn sat alone watching the sunset over FOB Griffin. Same desert, same mountains, same sky that had witnessed her transformation from supply sergeant to sniper. She thought about the path that had brought her here. Helicopter crash, Finnegan falling, the choice to pick up that rifle, every moment of fear and doubt and determination that had forged her into something new. She wasn't counting bullets anymore. She was making every single one count. Sid had given her permission to discover her potential. Now she was giving that same permission to others. The legacy didn't end. It continued, passed from teacher to student, generation to generation, each one carrying the weight and the wisdom forward. The sun touched the horizon, painted the sky orange and gold, the kind of beauty that only existed because of the darkness that surrounded it. Bryn stood, stretched, felt the familiar weight of Sid's notebook in her cargo pocket, felt Finnegan's scope ring on the chain around her neck, felt the weight of the faces she carried, the lives she'd taken and the lives she'd saved, the person she'd been and the person she'd become. She had held the line when the moment demanded it, and she would continue holding it, because that's what warriors did, what guardians did, what people who refused to quit did. The desert wind picked up, carried sand and memories. Bryn turned and walked back toward the barracks. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to pass forward what had been given to her. But tonight, she simply carried the gratitude for a mentor who'd believed in her, for circumstances that had revealed her, for the courage to become something she never imagined. She was Bryn Calloway, former logistics specialist, combat sniper, instructor, guardian, and her war was just beginning.